crime, a suspected sarin gas attack, killing dozens and sickening many more. Young children among the victims. Rescue workers desperately work to wash the chemical from the victims. Children clinging to life, struggling to breathe.
The gas attacks are continuing every day, and no one is doing anything to stop this gas attack.
This attack following 2 chlorine gas attacks over the past week. While this local activist reported from one of those hospitals, it was hit with another airstrike. The White House called the attack reprehensible and said it cannot be ignored by the civilized world.
The cell phone videos of chaos and carnage today on a Russian subway platform are what law enforcement officials around the world fear could happen in their city. Thick, acrid smoke, the mangled door of a subway car, passengers crying for help. At least 11 people were killed, their bodies pulled out of the wreckage. This bloodied woman was one of some 40 other passengers wounded in the blast, all from a single bomb that went off as the train traveled between 2 stations in mid-afternoon. Less than 1 hour later, officials discovered and disarmed a second bomb in this black bag, loaded with shrapnel, planted at another St. Petersburg subway station. It all happened in Russia's most westernized city, until now free from terror attacks, on the same day that Russian President Vladimir Putin arrived in St. Petersburg as part of his re-election campaign. Putin said it was too early to say who was responsible, but Russian experts say it was clearly meant to send him a message.
Residents of Mocoa, Colombia frantically searched for loved ones after a powerful flood of water, mud, and debris tore through their city Friday night and early Saturday. The disaster took more than 200 lives, many of them children, and left hundreds more missing and injured. The 3 rivers that surround Mocoa flooded after heavy rains. The torrent destroyed houses, ripped out trees by roots, and swept away cars and trucks. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos declared the area a disaster zone.
Millions of people in the Deep South are in the path of dangerous weather.
A suspected tornado toppled this mobile home near Lafayette, Louisiana on Sunday, killing a mother and her 3-year-old daughter inside, police said. Heavy rains, slashing winds, and hail as large as ping pong balls hammered homes and vehicles from Texas to Mississippi. Moist air, more typical of August than April, could bring flash floods with as much as 2 inches of rain falling an hour. Strong tornadoes remained a risk into Sunday night. Worshippers at the Real Life Church in Chesapeake, Virginia, meanwhile, had to find a new place to pray after a tornado tore through on Friday.
To Paraguay now, where an activist has been killed in violent clashes over a secret Senate vote to allow President Horacio Cartes to run for another term. According to the Paraguayan opposition, 25-year-old Rodrigo Quintana died from a rubber bullet that was fired by police. Thousands of young protesters took to the streets to protest a secretly passed bill that lifts presidential term limits. The largest protest resulted in a fire in the first floor of Congress. President Cartes has called for calm and promised the government will do all it can to maintain public order.
While troops of India and Pakistan have exchanged heavy fire and targeted each other's positions on the line of control, dividing the disputed region of Kashmir. Indian defense officials said the exchange started on Monday morning. No casualties or damage were reported on the Indian side. An Indian Army officer was killed in a blast in this area early on Saturday. Now, both countries accuse each other of provocations and violations of ceasefire agreements. Troops on both sides have agreed to give an appropriate response soon.
Some Haitians are living in caves and eating potentially poisonous plants to survive 6 months after Hurricane Matthew demolished much of their country. The storm virtually destroyed all the crops on farms that supplied the little food available to the people. Go to cbnnews.com to see more on this story from FaithWire, including a video of parents and their children, despite their circumstances, singing in the caves.
Tens of thousands of Australians are stranded by floodwaters. Powerful cyclone Debbie swept along the country's east coast, cutting roads, destroying bridges and killing 2 people. The disaster zone stretches 1,000 kilometres from Queensland State's tropical resort islands and Gold Coast tourist strip to the far New South Wales state. The disaster has left more than 100,000 homes powerless. 6 large rivers have reached major flood levels and are still rising in several areas, said the Bureau of Meteorology. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull urged people to be vigilant and not to take risks.
Next tonight here to North Korea and President Trump's warning that if China doesn't fix the problem, the U.S. will step in and deal with North Korea ourselves.
Tonight, a rare journey inside North Korea, just as tensions with the U.S. are escalating. While we're on the ground, President Trump delivers a new message, telling the Financial Times the U.S. is prepared to act alone to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions, saying, quote, "If China is not going to solve North Korea, we will." These comments come after the North Koreans have made a show of testing several ballistic missiles during the beginning of the Trump administration.
We put in all sorts of requests to visit out here, the launch locations where the missiles are being launched.
But instead, the North Koreans take us deep into the country to see another prized achievement, the country's high-end ski resort.
There's any other guests here, do you think, or we're the only ones?
It's eerily empty. The people on the slopes skiing to patriotic music coming from oversized screens. Meanwhile, several hundred miles away, the U.S. and South Korean troops continue to conduct joint military exercises. The top North Korean official for U.S. affairs tells me our army is at the highest alert.
Electricians start rewiring the town of Karakosh. The first signs of reconstruction since ISIL fighters were forced out in December last year. But the services will be of little benefit to the majority Christian community. There's hardly anyone here. Most of the inhabitants fled to Erbil, where they remain. The Sunday service is almost exclusively residents of Karakosh. Christians were a target for ISIL during their occupation, but the parish priest says the community should try to forgive.
Our view on the future is to live again, because the Christian religion has no enemies. Jesus taught us to love our enemies.
Forgetting, however, is quite another thing. Businesses and homes are ransacked or destroyed. The Church of the Immaculate Conception was torched, then turned into a training center for ISIL fighters. The thick walls almost obliterated by bullet holes. In the courtyard, a pile of ash, the remains of a library of rare Christian texts.
They completely burned it, and this is the place where they were getting trained. And the library of the church is here. They burned everything.
The next village along the road to Mosul is under the control of a Shia militia, unlike Mosul itself, which is majority Sunni Muslim. And sectarian tensions stoked by ISIL could explode once they're gone.
As Iraqi forces have moved inside the city of Mosul, the government's been very keen to ensure that it's only government troops and police that lead the charge. But with much of the territory around the city still in the hands of Shia militia, there are growing concerns that after the defeat of ISIL, there could be sectarian violence.
That could leave the Christians stranded in Iraq's complicated sectarian landscape, isolated and without friends.
At the moment, I don't want to talk about the Christian view of the sectarian issue, because the Christians have problems with all the other communities. If you don't let the Christians feel safe, then it's impossible for them to return. Absolutely impossible.